Welcome to another edition of Critical Issues, Alternative Views. I'm Ron Kramer, Professor of Sociology at Western Michigan University, and I serve as the host of our program. And with me today are our two regular commentators, discussants, and Regena Nelson is to my right. Regena is a professor in the Department of Teaching, Learning, and Educational Studies at Western Michigan University. And over here is Don Cooney. Don is a professor in the School of Social Work at Western, and he's also a Kalamazoo City Commissioner. Well, our topic for today and probably for the next several shows is the election of 2024, which obviously stands out there as the greatest critical issue, I think, confronting the country right now. And there are lots and lots of different issues to talk about relating to the election, and we're going to get into some of those today. We want to talk a little bit about the voting process, the importance of voting, how to get registered and all that, and Regina is going to talk to us a little bit about the League of Women Voters, and we want to talk about some of the larger structural barriers to voting in the United States and threats to our democracy. But let's start with the debate. Last night there was the first debate of this round between Donald Trump and President Biden. And Don, what'd you think?
It was less than wonderful, I think. It was embarrassing. It was embarrassing. President Biden stumbled all over himself. He did not at all rise to the occasion. I mean, that was an opportunity to show that age was manageable for him, that he was still vigorous. But he didn't do that at all. He looked weak. He mumbled. He was incoherent at times. He lost his place. And so that was terrible. On the other side, former President Trump was just ranting, lying consistently. What he said made no sense at all. And it was tremendously disturbing. And I just thought about, what does the rest of the world think of this country when we have these two people up there vying to represent our country, and they're doing so terrible up there?
Yeah. Regina, what was your take on the debate last night?
Same concerns. People are looking at these debates to get information about which way to go if they're on the fence, and what we saw last night did not help the cause at all. I think people are going to stay where they are. And it was unfortunate that Biden's presentation wasn't as strong as we would have liked it, because he had a great message to share. He had wins to share, like you said, but that was overshadowed by, Donald Trump's message that he wanted to get out, which was not fact-checked. It was allowed, that misinformation was allowed to take center stage, and that's very worrisome to a lot of people. That's what people are going to be left with, is that what he presented, not what Biden presented.
Yeah, somebody, a very wise person, told me that he was concerned that CNN did not allow for the moderators to fact-check during the debate itself, which, I mean, we had two veteran skilled journalists who were the moderators for the debate, and when Trump's up there mouthing lie after lie after lie after lie, distortion after distortion after distortion, it would seem that the moderators, it's an obligation, a responsibility of the moderators to say something about that in real time as it was occurring. That doesn't favor, I mean, they should have done the same thing to Biden. Sure. If Biden was puffing up his record and saying, well, that's not necessarily the case. Here's, on either side, they should have been able to interject when the candidates were really, really going beyond the bounds of reason and decency with regard to their comments.
But my understanding is that the Biden administration agreed to that beforehand. That was known beforehand, that there wouldn't be fact-checking, and that they were fine with that.
Well, they shouldn't have been.
That was a terrible mistake.
Yeah, that was a terrible. I think they made a number of critical mistakes, the Biden team. I think the Biden team that prepped him for the debate should all be fired today. I mean, I think they did a horrible job.
There's vacancies.
Well, I think they over-prepared him for one thing. Mm-hmm. They stuffed him with so many statistics and facts about his presidency that it was hard for him to keep it all straight and to make it come out in a coherent fashion. I think it should have been a simpler message, and maybe anticipating. I mean, they should have anticipated exactly what Trump was going to do, right. And they should have been prepared to give him more rope with which to literally,
That's right.
deal with themselves. And they should have also just had ways in which they thought Biden could effectively parry some of those lies and distortions that were coming. But they didn't seem to have, I don't know how you couldn't have anticipated that was coming.
I've been in debates when I ran for Congress and in forums for running for city commission and stuff. Two things you try to do right off the bat. First of all, you have to show you're very energetic and you're very excited and you really want to move something here. If you don't do that, you're not going to stand out and people aren't going to pay attention. Biden did the exact opposite. He did the exact opposite. The second thing is you don't let somebody else control the floor. He, instead of presenting his good ideas, as you said, Regina, that he has, the good record that he has, he spent his time responding to the lies, which he never got to what were his good points. And then when he did, he was so jumbled, he couldn't get it over there.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, we heard that he had some challenges. He wasn't feeling well. Perhaps he had a cold that impacted his voice. We did see that he did get a little stronger. Off the first 14 minutes or so, I think we were very nervous and panicked, and then it got a little bit stronger. But still, I think that was the lasting impression, unfortunately. Yeah.
So I guess the larger question is, what does it mean?
Right.
There are a lot of panicky Democrats today who are openly now talking about, replacing Biden at the head of the ticket. I think that's fraught with all kinds of problems, but nonetheless, that's now an open discussion, I think. And the second thing is, does it really move the needle? I mean, we have to remember that President Obama bombed in his first debate.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And was able to come back, obviously, and perform better the next time around and still win the election. And it was interesting, MSNBC in their coverage last night had a group of 4 undecided voters in Phoenix that watched the debate, and they had a journalist there with them. And so they did an extensive interview with those 4 people afterwards. And they were all negative about Biden's performance, but they were even more negative about Trump's performance. And definitely Trump. None of them were going to vote for Trump.
Wow.
Not a single one of them were moved to say that Trump's. And 3 of the 4 said they were probably still going to vote for Biden. And one woman said she was going to vote for herself. She was going to write herself. But I don't think. I don't know. It's hard to read these things, but I don't think Trump gained anything.
Yeah, I think
from because his performance was so typical Trumpian, and I think everybody kind of sees this guy for what he is, that he's a psychopathic liar when he's out there on the stage. So I don't think he moved the needle in his direction. Probably the hardcore Biden supporters weren't going to be, no matter how badly President Biden performed, weren't going to desert him at this point. The problem is with an election that's so close like this, you need to, there's that small group of people out there that are still undecided, and how do you, and I think appealing to younger voters is an issue. And so I don't think that, obviously Biden didn't win over the people that he needs to win over to put him over the top. He didn't lose. I don't think he lost as much ground as some people think he did last night, but I don't think he gained the ground that he needed to gain to really push the election forward. So I think we're still in a kind of a muddled mess here as we head into the rest of the summer and the nominating conventions, and the second debate now probably takes on even a more critical cast than it might have had Biden performed well. If Biden had performed well last night, Trump wouldn't have debated again.
Right.
Trump would have said, no, there's no way I'm going to do that again. But that didn't happen. So Trump's going to be eager to get back out there and see if he can mop up what he did last night with his lies and distortions and controlling the dialogue. And the Biden people, I think, I don't know what they're going to do. They have to rethink, I think, how they prepare President Biden for debating this particular candidate.
Right. Do they have a date for that second?
Is there a date? I don't remember. I think there might be.
Yeah.
I think there might be, but I'm not sure what it is.
Because if I were Trump, I'm not sure I would want to debate again.
He might think he won last night and that's it.
This guy, they leave that impression out there.
Yeah.
This is giving him a chance to recover.
Yeah.
Biden has another chance pretty soon. The 75th anniversary of NATO is coming up, and it's in Washington, D.C. And so he has a chance to get out there and show himself as a vigorous, well-respected leader. That could help a lot. So I don't know. We'll see.
Well, more to come on the fallout from this first debate. I mean, right now we're just the morning after. We're taping this the morning after the debate. And I think sometimes there tends to be a bit of an overreaction on the part of the media and the political savants to such a thing. And maybe as the weeks roll on, things will settle down, and this will not be as detrimental as some Democrats fear that it was to President Biden last night. So that remains to be seen. So we'll obviously revisit this debate and the fallout from this debate on future shows. Let's turn our attention to the larger issue of the election and the voting process. Obviously, we all know that this is a very critically important election between Biden and Trump, but we also have an important Senate race here in Michigan. Debbie Stabenow is stepping down, and so we have to look at that race, which is going to be a critical race. Of course, all the congressional races are ongoing, and so there's lots and lots of things out there with regard to this election season that we want to try to follow and pay attention to. And so, I mean, your argument and the League of Women Voters argument is the need for people to be informed and active participants, right?
Right, exactly.
Through the voting process. And that voting rights in general are very important, and that any kind of efforts to intimidate or suppress voting is something we want to vigorously oppose. So, you know, the League's been doing a fantastic job for a long time. I know that you're a member of our League here in Kalamazoo. Why don't you talk a little bit about the League and the mission and you know, just whatever you think is important for people to know about the League of Women Voters.
Yeah, so, you know, in light of what we saw last night, you know, debates are one way that people get information and education about candidates, but that's not the only way. And luckily, we have organizations like the League of Women Voters where they are committed to putting out factual information about elections, about candidates, about issues, so that we can have people participating in the democratic process of voting and changing policy and advocating for the changes that they want. And so that's a long sort of process. So you have to first start out with thinking about, does everybody have access and the right to vote? And you would think in this country that that would be a no-brainer, but we know that that's not the case, that there have been groups that have been disenfranchised from the voting process. And so the League looks around for when that's happening, when voter suppression is happening. Is it through policies? Well, then let's change those policies. Is it through things that are happening on the ground? So when we see things that there aren't enough polling places and people are standing in line for hours and hours and that discourages them from voting, we need to change that. when people show up to vote and someone says, oh, I don't think you can vote today because you don't have such and such documentation, and it's not true, take for instance here in Michigan, you can show up to vote if you don't have an ID. You can sign an affidavit that says that you don't have an ID and your vote will still be counted. But someone who doesn't know that could give you misinformation and tell you that you can't vote if you don't have an ID. Or if you've been in jail and now you're out of jail, you may have thought because, well, you were in jail, you lost your right to vote, but now that you're out, you can vote. So all of this is very important that people know that they have rights and the access to vote. So the league plays a big role in getting that information out to people to help them know that they have their voting rights. But then once you have your voting rights and you understand that, another big piece is voter registration. And so we do a lot with voter registration, and luckily we passed some laws here in Michigan that makes voter registration much easier. I mean, we can vote online. You can register, register to vote online. You can register up until on the day of the election.
That's
if you go
great.
to here, our city clerk's office, so that deadline that used to deter people, oh, I missed the voter registration deadline, that does not
That's
apply anymore.
It's not a barrier.
Yeah, exactly. So getting people registered to vote. And the league is very intentional about finding those groups where voter registration may be low. So we look at the youth. We go to high schools when students are just turning 18, and even 6 months before, they can fill out their form. So then automatically what will happen when they'll get that card in the mail when they turn 18. The same now that people can register when they're getting their driver's license. And we show up to all the places where we think that people may not have up-to-date voter registration. So if you've moved around a lot and you haven't updated your information, that could be a barrier when you show up and find out that that's not where you can vote, and that might discourage you. So we also work with people, and college students typically have issues with that. So they make sure that they're represented on college campuses to help people to vote as well. So that voter registration piece is very important, and we're engaged in that.
Now, what are the rules now with regard to college students? Do they have to register at their campus to vote, or do they have to go back home to vote where they
exactly.
might have been registered right out of high school?
Yeah, exactly. So you can do your absentee ballot to vote at home, or you can change your address and if you update your voter registration to vote on campus. So we do make sure that students know that.
Know what they have to do, even though they're miles away from home.
Exactly.
They still can and should participate in this process.
Exactly, letting them know that.
And don't we have a group on campus called We Vote that kind of educates students about the registration process and tries to get them registered?
Yes, we do. And I know professors, they give us information to allow them to come in our classes on campus to get the information out. They're at events such as Bronco Bash, you'll see them there. So there will be many opportunities for our college students to take care of this, to make sure that they are registered to vote properly.
And I think the last election, the city clerk set up an office in the student center where students could just go over there and vote. They were there a few times a week, and students could go right on the...
Exactly, right on campus.
Don, when you were a candidate, I'm sure that you were aware of the importance of this issue. Were there specific things that you and your campaign team did to try to work on voter registration?
There was a couple things. One, people who have been incarcerated are not aware often that if you have committed a felony and you are released from in prison, you can still vote. We've had people who say, yeah, I can't vote, I'm a felon. And we say, no, you can vote. One of the guys who was going door to door with me, and he had been incarcerated, and he knocked on the door and trying to convince this person to vote. And the lady said, do you vote? And he says, well, no, I'm a felon. And I heard him say that, and I went over to the guy and said, you can vote, you can vote. So that's one thing. Second thing is, people get intimidated. I had a case where one person, I'll just make up a name, she went to vote, she was on welfare. And she went there, and you know how you go in and you ask it, and they said, "What's your name?" And she said, "Ellie so and so." And she says, "No, it says Eleanor down here." She turned around and walked out and wasn't there. And then another case where a person was 70, and she said, "I never voted before because I was scared. I didn't know what to do." So the kind of work that you're doing is really important out there, because there are people who get intimidated.
Right.
There are people who are frightened and don't know how all this works. The simpler you can make it, the better it is.
Yeah, yeah. And you know, people are afraid of being, that there might be violence at the polls now because of these extreme views that are out there. And you know, that will not happen. There are protections for that. But some people, you know, that's what they believe. But it's nice now that people have choices, you know, right? That you can vote early, that you can vote by mail. So some of that should bring some of the pressure down. And it's the same when people say, "Oh, I can't get off work. I work all day, so no thank you," when you go knocking on doors. You're like, no. That's not, we can help you with that. We can help you with that.
And I think the city clerk and the county clerk have been wonderful in trying to make as accessible as possible all over the city and county.
So those changes, we hope, increases voter turnout. But the other big piece is that just because you are going to the polls and maybe you do know what to do as far as filling in the boxes, you may not know who to vote for or what to vote for. So education is the other big piece, and that's what we do. Education can happen through forums where we do get candidates to come. And I love the League of Women Voters process, how they moderate a forum, the kind of information that they give to the candidates about what's allowed and what's not allowed. And it's a very strict, scripted thing about how the questions are asked, how you can answer the questions, even the audience response. I have been a moderator, and if the audience claps, I have to say, "Oh, nope. No reaction from the audience to sway. This is like we're all listening to get information," because that could look like favoritism towards a candidate. And so we really want it to be nonpartisan, and that is the League of Women's Voters stance, is we're nonpartisan, but we can support issues, but we don't support candidates or parties.
I think the forums are so important because it's very difficult for people to know. I mean, in local elections, like this year, we're having a county commissioners elected. People don't know who these folks are. And just having them, giving them a chance to stand before people and make a response is tremendously important. Yeah, I'm so glad you do that.
And even if candidates aren't very articulate and, you know, have this great personality, their information gets out there in another way through our voter guide, and it's online, and it is vote411.org. You can go there to get information on the candidate. You can go there to see the ballot, so you can prepare yourself before you go. All of those things are very important, and the league works really hard to get that information. And it is interesting that they all answered the same questions. The league is not going to edit it for grammar misspellings, they say, only if something is, if it's not factual or if it's too long or something like that, they may cut it. But they really want that person's views to get out there. So it does give you a chance to like block out the noise if you're hearing a lot of things in ads and other places, and really read about the issues and how the people, what these people stand for, so you can make an informed choice. And that, to me, that is a great benefit for for everybody to take advantage of that, and it's free. So please make sure you know who you're voting for and what you're voting for.
And again, vote411.org is up on the screen right now, so people can note that and go there to get that information.
And also you have those newspapers, where you put the same thing that's on vote411.org, where they've answered those questions. People can pick them up in coffee shops and restaurants, or in a lot of different places. And that people find out.
So if you're not tech savvy and you don't go online, it is in a paper form, and it is also in Spanish. And that's really important too, that you can access this information in English and in Spanish.
Sounds great. So if people are interested in the league, not only what the league does, but maybe participating or volunteering with the league, what should they do?
Yeah. So when you also go to vote411.org, you will see information about volunteering, because, you know, we're excited that we have early voting. We have extended the days to vote, but that's not, the league doesn't coordinate that, but we hope that we get people to volunteer to staff those poll sites. So we need volunteers at all levels. So the league does voter services. So we do voter registration, and we have tabling events, and we look for volunteers within our membership to do that. Educating students, we do mock elections in high schools, and that's always exciting to get them to practice that. So then they know what they're getting into, and they're more likely to vote. But the whole process needs volunteers. We need people to be there on election day, to volunteer to be at the poll sites. We need observers. So the league plays another role in observing the process and taking notes, and then we send that to the secretary, Michigan's secretary, to make sure that if we see anything, that we report that, and they have a process of investigating that. So that's an important role. We also observe when they are certifying the elections, the Board of Canvassers. So we take notes on that process, and we have a checklist of exactly the steps they have to go through to certify the election, and we're making sure that they follow those steps. So we need volunteers for all of that. And of course, just getting the word out to get people out to vote, because we know that when we did this in 2020, we had record participation in voting, and we need that now.
Absolutely.
We definitely need that now. So we have to increase our efforts in this to get everybody out there to vote.
Very, very important that everybody gets out to vote. And historically, you know, voter participation in the United States has been relatively low.
Yes.
I mean,
Yes.
you would think that, you know, for all the talk about the United States and American exceptionalism and the American democracy, that people would be very high in terms of voter participation, but we're not.
No,
Other
terrible.
countries put us to shame with their voter participation rates, and so the league's work, I think, is so vital to help bring that participation rate up to where it should be. And so you're doing great work. And
Yeah, I think it's terrific what you're doing. Yeah, it's great.
Right, right. And I think there's a fear. You'll hear one of the reasons when you ask people, are you voting? And if they tell you no, is that they think that their vote doesn't make a difference. And there's some, you know, because of the Electoral College and how we do things, some people might see that their popular vote, I voted for this person who won the popular vote, but then they didn't become the president. So my vote didn't count. So there's like, we need to talk to people about that. Or, you know, there are people who believe we need to change that process.
right.
So people understand your vote does count in that way. So that is something too that the league has to do, is that information about, yes, your participation matters in countering those excuses that people may use not to vote.
because, as you point out, there are, in fact, if we look at the larger historical context here, there are lots of structural and political barriers that have been erected to prevent people from voting. I mean, it's very important for us to remember that during the years of Jim Crow, legalized segregation in the South, that there was a very concerted effort to keep African American people from being able to vote.
Right.
And they did it in all kinds of underhanded ways, requiring a poll tax to be paid before one could vote, or some literacy test, which was impossible to pass, right? Or just violence and intimidation to keep people from registering in the first place, right?
Right.
So we have to remember there's a long history here of the active effort to suppress African Americans from voting in the South. And the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was one of the major legislative victories of the Civil Rights Movement. The Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 were tremendously important, but we've slipped because the current Supreme Court has basically stopped the enforcement of the Voting Rights Act.
Yes.
Yep.
They've basically said, well, you know,
We did that.
we
now
did
it's
that.
settled, so
yeah,
we don't
everything's
have to monitor that.
fine now. Nothing like that will happen now. Well, as soon as they basically say they're not going to keep monitoring states for their compliance, what happens? All these things come rushing back in. And we now see another wave of very active efforts on the part of the Trump folks and unfortunately the Republican Party to suppress the African American vote. They think, well, these people are not going to vote for us. They don't agree with us on the issues, so we're not going to, and we'll lose if we don't keep them from voting. So we're going to make sure we don't allow them to vote.
Exactly.
And in state after state after state in the South and some places in other places, these kinds of things have come back into play. And again, you know, poll taxes and literacy tests are not there, but there are other ways in which barriers have been erected to keep people from voting.
Yeah, I mean, you see pictures of very long lines and people waiting 2 to 3 hours. And I forget which state, I thought it might be Georgia, but I'm not sure, where it's forbidden to bring food or drink to somebody that's standing in line.
Right. It is Georgia. It was Georgia.
Was
that
Georgia?
did that last time, yeah.
I mean, that's so sad.
Yeah, so again, there are very active efforts to suppress and intimidate voters, and so those have to be opposed, and the League is not the only organization that's doing this, or should be the only organization doing this, but that should be on our radar, that voting is a sacred right in a democracy, and there are people who are attempting to interfere with that right and prevent people from casting a vote because they know that their political position won't be supported by those people if they vote in larger numbers, right?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
And this is African Americans historically and currently, but young people. There's very active effort to make it more difficult for college students to vote in many states, and just in general, people who are poor or come from a lower socioeconomic status often have other kinds of issues and barriers that prevent them from participating in the voting process. And so, again, that's why the League's work is so important, I think, to help ensure that everyone who wants to vote can participate in the democratic process.
Exactly. Yeah. And I know also locally NAACP does a lot because they have their hands on the communities that have been disenfranchised from voting and making sure that they remove those barriers as well. So it will take all of us, all hands on deck.
A. Philip Randolph Society, they're very active in getting people out there to vote, work with the NAACP. Yes.
Right.
And you mentioned something extremely important earlier. Another structural barrier is the Electoral College itself.
Yeah.
You know, the Constitution set up the Electoral College because it didn't trust democracy in a sense. It was an effort to allow the elites to still control who was going to be elected in a sense, or to prevent the riffraff, the ruffians, from participating in the process and having their voices heard. So the Electoral College is very undemocratic, and you touched on exactly. You know, if you win the popular vote, you still might lose the election.
Yeah.
I mean, how ridiculous is that? The person that gets the most votes should win. Right? But that's not our system.
Right.
And frequently in recent years, including both in 2016 and the 2000 election, George W. Bush, the person who won the popular vote did not win the election.
Yes.
That's, to me, that's an abomination on a democratic process.
Right.
The Electoral College should have been abolished years ago.
Right.
And one of the major things that we need to do is to abolish the Electoral College. We need to get rid of it. It doesn't serve any purpose except to prevent the democracy, to be a barrier to true democracy in this country. And so that's one issue. Now, what the Electoral College also does, it sets up a system whereby only certain states really count
Yes.
in the
Yes.
in the presidential election, right? Because okay, we know there are red states and blue states, right? Some states are going to vote Republican no matter what. Some states are going to vote Democratic no matter what. And so, in a sense, they don't really count anymore in the electoral process.
Right.
If I'm a presidential candidate, I'm not going to bother. You know, if I'm a Democrat, I'm not going to go to the red states because they're not going to vote for me anyhow, or even if I get some votes, that's not going to be enough to win. If I'm a red state, if I'm a Republican, I'm not going to go to probably some of the blue states because, again, the same process is in effect. So what that does is it limits it to certain states, swing states as they're called, or the battleground states.
I think there's 5 of them, aren't there? Only 5?
Well, there's 5 or 7, depending
Maybe
on
7.
how you want to count it. I mean, Michigan is one of them.
Yes.
I mean, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, those 3 in particular.
Ohio?
Ohio has slipped from that category. I mean, I think Ohio used to be a key battleground state,
but not now.
it seems more red now, even though, they still have a Democratic senator,
Yes, yes.
and Sherrod Brown, and he manages to somehow still win, even though that state has become a redder state over time. But I think in terms of battleground, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, I think Virginia might be in that category. Georgia emerged last time as a battleground state. Arizona, surprisingly,
Arizona.
did.
Yes.
And Nevada.
Yeah.
And New Mexico. Well, New Mexico's pretty blue anymore, but I think Nevada and Arizona and Georgia and maybe Virginia, sometimes North Carolina gets counted in there. Certainly Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin.
Right.
And so if you're a presidential candidate, where are you going to spend all? I mean, we're going to be inundated with ads, political ads. We're going to have to suffer through all these ads from now until November when the election occurs. And if you're in a different state, you're not going to see any ads, right? Why waste your money in a totally red state or a totally blue state running ads for your candidate? It's a waste of money.
Right.
So hit those battleground states and focus in. And so, and that's why, again, it allows for, if you can siphon away a few of those battleground states, given the electoral map, which is what Trump did in 2016, right?
Yeah.
He was able to get Wisconsin, Michigan, and I think Pennsylvania, and that turned the election. He lost the popular vote by an astounding, I think it was like 3 to 4 million votes in 2016. And yet he still was the elected president because of the Electoral College. And so again, to me, this is just a structural barrier to democracy in the United States, and it needs to be abolished. But it's not going to be abolished before the election this year.
No.
And so again, we come back to the concentration on the key battleground states.
One of the issues, so I think tremendously important, is how much elections cost now to run for office is just so prohibitive. I always tell my students okay, if you knew 6 years ago that this was Stabenow's last term, and you decided, boy, I always thought about being a senator. I think I'll run next time. You would have to raise between $15,000 and $20,000 a week, every week, for the next 6 years to be competitive in that Senate race. So where are you going to get that kind of money? We'll each throw in $1 or something. No, you have to go to the people that got the money and the corporations that got the money, and then you're in their pocket. And that's terrible.
Yeah. It is. And Citizens United, the Supreme Court decision, has made it very, very difficult because it basically allows large corporations and wealthy people to contribute as much money as they want to support their candidate. And a lot of this money is dark money because we don't know where it's coming from. We can't trace it. and there are many ways in which this money can be funneled to candidates. And again, you never know that there are certain industries or certain corporations that are heavily backing one candidate because they know that candidate will support their interests, right? Will deregulate them or cut their taxes or in general support an environment that they feel will be conducive to their businesses. So the dark money problem and the Citizens United decision. Campaign finance, I mean, we've talked about this forever, haven't we? I mean, back in the Nixon era, campaign finance was a huge issue, and Congress tried to pass some reforms along the way, but they've never been very successful. And then with the Citizens United decision, basically all
Opened
the doors.
the floodgates, yeah.
The floodgates, that's a good analogy. The floodgates were opened and the flood of money going to certain candidates came in, and that distorts the electoral process.
Sure, yeah, democracy. You can have, Judge Brandeis said, you can have a democracy or you can have great inequality in wealth. You can't have both.
Right.
And we got great inequality of wealth, and so the democracy is in trouble, big trouble.
We have the best democracy that money can buy. Right? So that's an issue. Now, there are some other issues here that aren't directly related. Well, they are related to the electoral process. I'll take that back. So gerrymandering is another huge issue, and the gerrymandering has become a huge problem in states like Wisconsin. It was a problem in the state of Michigan, although we have taken steps to overcome that. But it allows one party who gains control of the state legislature to then draw the electoral maps and to set them up in such a way as to favor their party.
Right.
This is what gerrymandering means. And so it's an unfair advantage for the party that's currently in power.
Right.
So here's the point: we shouldn't allow partisan political entities to draw the maps. Right? The maps should be drawn by independent organization, and that's what we've gone to now in Michigan. Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And so that becomes another problem. So in general, what we have are various forms in which minority rule can take place.
Yes.
What some scholars have called the tyranny of minority rule. So there's a couple of excellent books out there, and I think we can get them up on the screen here. Ari Berman is one who has written extensively about these issues, and he's got a new book about minority rule, and he outlines a lot of these issues and problems that we've just been talking about. Stephen Levitsky and Daniel Ziblatt, who wrote a great book on how democracies die.
Yeah.
Which everybody who's interested should read. But their new book is Tyranny of the Minority. And both Ari Berman and these are two Harvard professors, and they do a great job. And this book in particular provides a larger historical context and looks to kind of a comparative analysis of the United States with other countries and what ways in which minorities have been able to gain power in other countries and maintain that power. But I highly recommend this book, and then the Ari Berman book would be another great addition for people to take a look at. There it is, up on the screen. Minority Rule by Ari Berman, The Right-Wing Attack on the Will of the People and the Fight to Resist It. So Berman is a great journalist who has followed this issue extensively. And, while the first book is a bit more academic, this book is a bit more practical. Here's the things that are happening. Here are the things that we need to do right in the here and now to resist it. But I highly recommend both of those books. Now, there's one other issue here that I want to really highlight. I think this is from the Ari Berman book. But another structural barrier to democracy in the United States is the way the United States Senate is set up, right? So we have there are two houses in our Congress, right? There's the Senate and there's the House of Representatives. Of course, the House of Representatives is basically, representatives are elected in terms of the population within the state, right? So you get congressional districts that are related to the population. So that seems to be a much fairer democratic way to do it. If you lose population, you might lose some of your seats. If you gain population, you might gain some seats. Okay, but in the Senate, every state, and this goes back even to when the Constitution was passed, and remember, the founders were very suspicious of democracy. Number one, they wouldn't allow direct election of senators. The senators can only be appointed by the governor of the state, but the Senate was set up in such a way as to make it very unrepresentative. And so no matter how small your population in your state is, you still get 2 senators. No matter how large the population is in your state, you get just 2 senators.
Right.
So what happens is now we have a 70-30 split. So let me explain the 70-30 split. So so you have 30% of the population in the United States is 35 states, which means they have 70 senators. So 30% of the population has 70 senators, and the reverse is that. So 70% of the population, which is concentrated in 15 states, so 15 states, 2 senators each, they only have 30 senators.
Wow.
Right? So 70% of Americans are represented by only 30% on the U.S. Senate.
Wow.
And so again, there's this, think of California, right?
Yeah.
There could be, you could probably identify some 25 states and put their population together, and you wouldn't come up to what California is.
Right.
But each one of those states has 2 senators, and California still only has 2 senators. So the 70-30 split, where the vast majority of Americans are vastly underrepresented in the United States Senate. And then, of course, throw in the filibuster, which is not in the Constitution, and all of a sudden, hey, you don't need just 51 votes in the 100-seat Senate chamber. You need 60. Why do we need 60? Well, 51's the majority, right? No. They've got this filibuster rule, which makes it that, again, you have to come up with 60 votes on almost every issue, except for a few situations where you can get it back down to 51. But again, both of these are very undemocratic processes and procedures that allow for minority rule.
Right.
The title of these books, Minority Rule.
Yeah, right. And there's no real serious effort to change that.
No, there's not. And that's part of the problem. I mean, that's why these scholars and Berman have written these books, to point to these very critical problems and issues that make the fact that a minority can be the ruler in the United States, that we're not as democratic as we proclaim to be, right?
So the other thing is, like in European parliaments, like the Green Party, if they get 12% of the vote, they get 12% of the seats in the parliament. Here, if you get 35% of the vote, you get nothing, right?
Winner take all.
Winner take all. So yeah, that really cuts down on popular participation and democracy.
Yeah. So again, there are obstacles to people just getting out to vote, but then there are also these larger structural obstacles that even if people are voting, right? Even if the League of Women Voters does the fantastic job that they do, and they get people registered and they educate them and they get them to the polls, it might not matter in the end, right?
Exactly.
Because of these kind of structural barriers that we've been talking about. So I think these are issues that we need to attend to. Now, obviously, we're not going to change these issues before the November election, but I think in the long-term view, in terms of the survival of American democracy, which is very much a question.
Yes.
Given what Trump has been talking about and what the Trump team that he's assembling has been talking about in terms of their plan, the 2025 plan that's been put together by the Heritage Foundation, most of that would unravel American democracy and slide us toward an authoritarian system, in which not only a minority of voters control the system, but certain factions within the country would have undue power, and that would be to the great detriment of the rest of the country. So there's a real threat that American democracy could go down.
Yes.
with this election.
Yes.
I don't think that's stating it too starkly, that
No.
we really
No.
need to be very afraid about that. We have about 8 or 9 minutes left here, and you folks may want to jump in and talk about some of the things that I was just talking about. But one final thing I'd like to add in is the problem of disinformation and misinformation.
Yes.
And the role of the media in the electoral process. And so I find that, increasingly there is disinformation out there, and that this is distorting our political process.
Exactly.
Because so many people believe things to be true that are not true. And I think some political operatives have been very successful in utilizing the disinformation process and manipulating it to introduce distortions and lies into the system in an effort to gain political power.
Right.
And we need to be aware of that, and we need to think about how we're going to counter disinformation. Now, this is one thing that we can still do for the rest of this year leading up to this election, is to be aware of the disinformation and attempt to counter it.
Well, I mean, you gave a great example in the beginning. Last night, all the disinformation that was poured out there, to go back and to do that, and to document where the lies were and what is the reality is so important. And that's pretty, I'm not sure a lot of people are going to look at that. I think people get their news from TikTok. People get, and they don't hear the follow-ups. They don't hear the other things, and I think that's really troubling to me.
Yeah. And it's going to be even more convincing now that AI has improved to such a degree that it looks real. Like, we really don't know if this is true or not. And that is going to be an issue, that we do have to have these trusted sources or objective sources that can present the truth, because people are just not going to believe the other side.
That's right.
Because we're so polarized right now. So, and that's why, Trump gets away with what he does, because people believe everything he says is true. His cult, his followers,
And so, people only listen to their side.
Right, exactly.
And their side is going to reinforce.
Right.
So that's a real problem. It's a huge problem. And I guess there are organizations that check these things out. I know the New York Times does it. But other organizations too, like I don't know, Focus on the Media is one, and a couple other ones that really look at this. And
Media Matters, I think.
Media Matters, yes. They look at these things and then they document. But that, you got to know about them, and you've got to go to look to those places.
Exactly.
Well, this is an issue I think I want us to come back to and talk about a bit more, and there are certainly a number of excellent books that have been written about this topic, and some other, we can identify some other websites that people can go to get accurate information. But I think this is just really a critical issue, and the money that's spent on the campaign ads, and the ads are, just drive me crazy, because there's lie after lie, distortion after distortion. Both sides tend to do it. But I think the Trump side has been, really has excelled in presenting the disinformation campaign for their candidate. I mean, last night, if you had one other takeaway from, people are going to talk about how badly Biden performed last night in the debate, but the other headline was all the lies that Trump told.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, if you go to some objective fact check source today, they will have documented almost every single lie that Trump told last night, and they were legion. And that's the other big story last night, is that the Trump campaign is based on lies and disinformation, and yet those don't get countered effectively. Well, Biden didn't counter them effectively last night during the debate. The media doesn't, I think, despite their efforts to try to, doesn't effectively counter them. And so I think that becomes a responsibility of citizens participating in the process. Educate themselves and help educate their friends and neighbors about the issues involved in this election and the misinformation and disinformation that is out there.
One of the problems is that Trump gave so many so much disinformation last night. It takes so long to get the document out there. I know Amy Goodman this morning said she counted 25, and that was a conservative count.
Oh.
And to go through all those and to document the other side is quite a job.
Who was it that said a lie can travel around the world 3 times before the truth even puts its running shoes on?
Exactly.
Sounds like it was something Mark Twain would have said, but I'm not sure that that's an accurate attribution there.
Yeah.
But it shows the problem that we're up against. The lies are so hard to counter, and they're so effective. And you know, Trump has basically has a group of supporters who don't believe the truth even when it's presented to them, because they distrust the national media, they distrust the Democrats, and they distrust elites in general, right? I mean, how can climate science denial exist except for people don't believe, you know, don't believe what the climate scientists are putting out there? So we have a really tremendous problem.
It really gets into the area of propaganda. And the Nazis were the experts in propaganda. And people learn from that. Advertisers have learned from that. And they really play on people's emotions so that they don't think. They're just looking at what they feel. They're not looking at what people are saying there.
Well, thanks to both of you. This has been an excellent discussion today. Thanks, Regena, for letting people know about the League of Women Voters. And I hope people will take advantage of looking at those books for more information about the tyranny of the minority idea. And we're just getting started. Hopefully for the rest of this year up until the election, on this show, we're going to focus on issues that will come up in the election. I have quite a list here. Don joked that I had 2 to 3 days worth of material here for us to talk about, but we'll try to get back on our next shows and cover some of these important issues as they relate to the election. So again, and don't forget about the vote441.org if you want more information, and the excellent books that we put up on the screen. And so again, we hope that you will rely on Critical Issues to be a source of information, of objective, factual information about issues related to the election. We have our political perspective, which we don't hide, but I think we can also back up our assertions that we make by pointing to objective evidence or scientific evidence as it relates to climate change and so forth. So we'll be trying to present that in the coming months. So we hope that you'll come back and visit us again here on Critical Issues, Alternative Views. Thank you.